Many of the young widows left behind married again and started new families. Other women who were less inclined to start a new family went to schools, found jobs, and kept their equilibrium. That may sound easy enough to do to today's younger generations, but in the 1940s and 1950s, women had more limited educational and work opportunities. These were people whose lives had been consumed by coal mining and for whom breaking clean in another entirely new direction was easier said than done. Comfort and encouragement came from families and church affiliations. These relationships stretched back through the decades. When many families came to work in the mines of southern Illinois, they spoke little English, had virtually no education, and were not welcomed by native citizens. In 1947 and 1951, during a time of crisis and loss, cultural connections served survivors well. The literature of coal mining makes the point over and over again that death and injury were considered acceptable risks for miners and their families, and workers took this reality in stride. They knew from history that men would die mining coal. The unanswered questions were when, where, and how many. The explosions of Centralia and West Frankfort rattled even the most self-confident mining families. The loss of one life or two, while lamentable, still meant everyone else kept on working. When scores died, the spirit, the continuity of generations, and the way of life were threatened. Also, by today's standards, the financial aid for coal miners survivors was meager. The Mine Workers Union provided payments to help cover funeral costs or immediate survival needs. Local charities came to the rescue for a while. Funds collected by community efforts provided short-term financial aid. Mining company operators chipped in a few dollars, and survivors received some workers' compensation money. However, there were no legislated awards and no resources paid for the unfulfilled promise of lost lives. Under these circumstances, the accomplishments of mine disaster survivors are all the more amazing. The safety nets so often discussed today were within reach, but cradled relatives only until they could stand alone. The rest was up to them.
Today, we're here to discuss Death Underground, the Centralia and West Frankfort mine disasters. I'm here with author Robert E. Hartley, who is one of the authors of this book. It was published by Southern Illinois University Press in 2006. These mine disasters were some of the worst mine disasters in the history of the United States. The Centralia No. 5 disaster happened in March 25th, 1947. 111 men were killed that day. The other one in West Frankfort is the New Orient No. 2 disaster, which happened December 22nd, 1951. 119 men were killed in that disaster. It happened 70 years ago on December 22nd, 1951. We're coming up on that anniversary, and that's why we're talking about the book today. So, Bob Hartley, you are a longtime newsman from the Midwest and worked for some of the Central and Southern Illinois papers for years, and also you are a prolific historian. Could you tell me a little bit more about yourself?
I'll tell you a little bit.
All right.
I'm a native Kansan, attended and graduated from the University of Kansas with a journalism degree in 1958, which was indeed a long time ago. After that and some military service, I began a newspaper career that lasted about 30 years. And during that time, I enjoyed a lengthy experience as reporter, editor, and publisher of newspapers across the country. And during all of that, my exposure to reporting, editing, and writing a column during my time in Illinois inspired my deep interest in history of the state, and especially the political history.
Okay, so in Death Underground, you write some wonderful texts about the families, the towns, the importance of coal in central and southern Illinois, but you also wrap in the politics, don't you? And so, what brought you to this story?
Well, I had a book published by the SIU Press in 1999 about Paul Powell, a well-known political figure in Southern Illinois. And one of my helpmates on that project was a retired SIU professor named David Kenney. And he helped me a lot on that book. And he suggested that we team up and write a book together. And he suggested a joint project featuring two Illinois mine disasters in Centralia and West Frankfort. Now, that was just the beginning, of course. He was a native of Southern Illinois and naturally counted heavily on his personal knowledge and feeling to get started. I had a much steeper learning curve. I asked a research assistant in Springfield to find all she could about in state government documents about Centralia. She found nothing, no files,
Really?
no recollections, no knowledge of the file at all. I really felt stymied.
Oh my, yeah.
A few days later, she reported that she had located some state files on Centralia at the Benton mining office. The official in that office, bless his soul, had saved the documents that were collected originally in Springfield, and they were getting ready to get rid of them, to destroy them, clear out their files. And they called him and they said, would you be interested in having them at your office? And he, of course, said yes, fortunately.
Yes. Yeah.
So I had planned a trip to Centralia anyway for research, and I included a stop in Benton. And I saw he had, as a part of this file, all of the original inspection reports on Centralia from the federal inspector as well as the state inspector, Driscoll Scanlon, who is a major figure in this book. And while we were talking, I said, have you got any knowledge of people I ought to be making contact with about this, about Centralia? He said, well, I'll tell you. There's a relative of Driscoll Scanlon over in the little town of Venedy over in Southern Illinois. And you might want to get in touch with him because he says he's got a collection of materials of Driscoll's. And I contacted him, and then on that same trip, went over to Venedy and spent a day going through Driscoll Scanlon's files. He kept notes on every political item. It was material that nobody had seen, nobody had known, and nobody had published. It was a gold mine for me.
Oh my.
And
my goodness, yes.
So that was the epiphany of this project. Well, David and I conferred frequently on our progress, gathering images for the book and doing all the associated things that are required. Each coal mine story in the book can be divided fairly neatly into 4 parts. First, the history leading to the explosions. And without that, the story would be missing a vital piece. You have to understand what these 2 mines meant to Southern and Central Illinois and how they got there after World War II. Then the next one is the next section is, of course, the explosion and the deaths and relating that story in depth. Then the third major part is the political strife. And that is, of course, a result of everything that went before that event.
Yes.
And then the part that really tugs at my heart, the aftermath, the impact on survivors and how people did survive. And I think that's the part of the story that, when all is said and done, meant the most to me as the writer of one part of this book. And David and I shared that same experience. He interviewed dozens of people in Southern Illinois. Many of them were people he knew who had some connection to West Frankfort. And that's really the meat of this book. It's the stories people told us and what we were able to derive from those as it related to the facts. And so the book was published, as you had said earlier, in 2006. And I have to say that in our own aftermath, David and I and my wife, Mary, traveled throughout Southern and Central Illinois selling books.
Did you?
We thought we needed to go out on the road, and we had a grand time just doing that. And
I'll bet.
and I must say, of all the books that the SIU Press has published of mine, this book has sold the most copies.
Wow, good. I'm glad. I think that's really an important what you just said about the people, because this coal mining, I know the area somewhat, and I knew it was all about that mining was a big deal here. But I think your book really brings home how mining captures or molds the character of the people here in Southern Illinois. Would you say that?
Yeah, it's deep in the culture of that region still today. It may not be nearly as dynamic as it was even when we were doing this research, but it still is part of the very culture of Southern Illinois. And I think that's what made David and I both feel good about it. And my trip to Centralia ranks today as one of the most fascinating and emotional ventures of a career chasing down book information.
Yes.
Memorable people willing to talk of their most emotional moments, showing me pictures, family telling me family stories. It opened an entire world for me in the research for this book. And I think that's the guts of it, frankly.